What are you hoping for right now in your life? Perhaps you're hoping for better finances for the future. Perhaps you're hoping that those gas prices will drop a little bit. Perhaps you're hoping that you're going to get that job. Perhaps you're hoping that you're going to get into that college, that you're going to get into that school. Perhaps you're hoping that someday you'll be able to live a life that is stable and comfortable, but you just don't see how the bank account is going to allow you to do that right now. Perhaps you're hoping to buy the car that's going to get you to the place that you need to get to. Perhaps you're hoping to find a good family, friend group that you can be a part of. Perhaps you're hoping. You fill in that blank. What is the thing that you're hoping for? You see, hope is an interesting concept. Hope is an interesting idea. We say the word a lot. We use it all the time. I'm hoping for this. I hope that I get that job. I hope that I get enough money for the car. I hope. Hope kind of implies this idea that something is going to get better. And what's interesting is that throughout the book of Genesis, the book that we've been studying, there's this idea of hope that God promises to Israel the promised land. He promises to Abraham that he's going to make him a great nation. And it's these promises that God gives that gives these characters that we've been learning about the hope to keep moving forward even through life's toughest battles. And yes, they make a ton of mistakes along the way and things go wrong, but this idea of hope is what propels them forward, propels them towards God, propels them to keep moving forward in this story that we have been reading in the book of Genesis. Hope is what fueled Joseph to keep doing the right thing. Because God promised him in his visions that he would be elevated to a position of authority. And God would bless him. This idea of hope is all throughout the book of Genesis. And as we're coming to a close, as this is the last lesson in this quarter of the Sabbath School Lesson, as we're getting to a close here, this idea of hope is still ever present. And I hope that as we take a look at this story today of what hope is for Jacob and Joseph and for the Israelites, that it's going to speak a truth for us today of what hope can do for our lives today. To know that this world, the things of this world, it's not the end. There is a hope that things are going to get better. Welcome to this week's Sabbath School Short, and this week we're looking at lesson number 13, which is titled Israel in Egypt. And the memory text for this week is found in Genesis chapter 47, verse 27, and it says this: So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. We're getting to the close of Genesis. We're in Genesis chapter 47 where the memory text comes from, and we're looking at Genesis 47, 48, 49, and kind of the close, Genesis 50. And now Joseph, has risen to this place of authority. He's second in command in the land of Egypt. We talked about that last week, and how his brothers came, and how he confronted them, forgave them, and all of these kinds of things, and told them, hey, let's have everyone move here. So the Israelites are coming into the land of Egypt, and Joseph's father, Jacob, is now coming into this land. And in Genesis chapter 46 is a very interesting thing. It lists out all these different names of the children of Israel that are coming into the land. And to be honest, sometimes those are kind of boring to read, are they not? You get this long list of just a bunch of names that are really hard to pronounce, right? But there's some theological significance here in these names. There is important depth and meaning in these names. You see, as these names are listed out, including the daughters, which is it's not the norm. It's not normal, right? These listing of the names of the daughters and everything in this story speaks to the promise of Abraham's promise, that God promised Abraham, I will make you into a great nation. And this long list of names that they are going into this land in Genesis chapter 46 is just an echo of that. Hey, God has made Abraham into he fulfilled his promise. That gives us hope that God will fulfill the promises in our lives. And so the whole nation of Israel is moving into Egypt now. And Jacob, I imagine, is so excited to see Joseph. This is his beloved son that he loves so much, and he thought he'd been dead all of these years, but he's actually alive. And to top it all off, he's second in command of Egypt, and God used him to save the whole nation, to save the known world from the famine, right? And Jacob is so excited to see his son. Fathers, I'm not a father yet, but fathers, I can't imagine that if you think that you lost a son, but then you figure out that he's alive, that you are so excited to see him. I imagine that this same excitement is dwelling within Jacob as they are taking that journey towards Egypt. There's a couple of other stories here. Genesis chapter 48, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, right? And he bestows a blessing upon them, and then Jacob blesses his sons and all these prophecies about what they would do, because this is the nation of Israel, right? Jacob's sons are the 12 tribes of Israel, and they would soon become these names, and all these prophecies are spoken through Jacob about the state of the people. Very interesting stuff to read, but I really want to focus on Thursday's lesson because it ties it all together with these three main ideas. Thursday's lesson is titled The Hope of the Promised Land. And in Genesis chapter 49, through to the end, Genesis chapter 50, there's these three different events that kind of are filled with this idea that we open with, are filled with this idea of hope and what that means. First, the lesson says in Thursday's lesson, the hope of the promised land. It says, first, there is the hope that Israel will return to the promised land. You see, they were dwelling in the land of Canaan. This was the promised land that God gave to them. This was the land that God promised, but now they have to pick up and leave because this famine is so intense. It's so horrible, and now they have to leave to dwell in Egypt where there is food and they can prosper and all these kinds of things. They have to leave the very land that God promised to give them. I imagine that Jacob, especially in this moment, is wrestling with this idea of my son is in Egypt, but here's the land that God promised me. But the story before, God comes to Jacob in visions and tells him, hey, you have to leave. You need to go dwell in Egypt. But first, there's this idea that they will return to the promised land. And secondly, it says there is the hope that God will turn evil into good. You see, after Jacob's death and burial, Joseph's brothers, they're worried about their future. In fact, that's exactly what the Sabbath School Lesson says. It says, second, there is the hope that God will turn evil into good. And after Jacob's death and burial, Joseph's brothers are worried about their future. You see, Joseph could have taken revenge on them. He's in second place of authority in Egypt. He is in a very high position of power. He could have taken revenge on them. So they come to Joseph, they prostrate themselves before him, they bow down to him to become his servants. And this scenario obviously is reminiscent of Joseph's dreams, that of the Baals bowing down to him and all these things, right? That Joseph had these dreams, these visions, that one day they would bow down to him. And this prophecy is being fulfilled right here. But this is where Joseph says that really cool phrase. He says this, the lesson says, Joseph reassures them and tells them to not be afraid. A phrase that refers to the future. Because what was meant evil against him, God meant for good. And turned the course of events toward salvation. That is, even despite so many human failures, God's providence will overrule. This is such a beautiful part of the story that fills us with hope, to know that the things that are meant for evil, that humanity does, that I do every day, God can use those things for the good, for the salvation of many. And this is a huge, I would even say this is one of the huge themes throughout the book of Genesis, because throughout the book of Genesis you have humanity failing over and over and over again, right? The very beginning of the garden, humanity fails. Abraham messes up over and over and over again, right? These heroes of faith that we know, right? They're falling short, but God is constantly using their evil for the good, for the salvation of many. So even when we mess up, even when you mess up, even when I mess up, God can use that mess up and bring good out of it. There's some hope for you right there. And then third, the lesson says, third, there is the hope that God will save fallen humankind. The lesson also says this, ultimately the hope of the promised land, Canaan, is a symbol, a precursor to the ultimate hope of salvation, of restoration, of a new Jerusalem, and a new earth, and a new heaven, and a new earth. The ultimate hope for all of us, a hope made certain by the death of Shiloh. This is huge for you and me today. And this is why I firmly believe that there's no better place to be than in a relationship with God. Because he gives the hope to know that all this, all your worries, your struggles, the evil, the injustice that we see in this world, all this stuff, it's temporary, it's not permanent. There is a new Jerusalem coming. There is a promised land coming for you and for me, and it's found in Jesus Christ. This land that is heaven is coming. Jesus is coming back. That is some hope, to know that this stuff we're experiencing is not the end. That gives me hope to put one foot in front of the other and fight life's hardest battles, because I know that this is not the end. There is a heaven. There is a Jesus Christ. There is a God who loves me, who loves you with an everlasting love, and who's promised not to leave us here, but to come back and set all things right, to put an end to evil, to put an end to sin, to put an end to injustice, to put an end to all these horrible things that we see in this world, to put an end to it all and restore the love and goodness of God in our hearts and perfect us. That is a hope that we can look forward to. And the book of Genesis shows us that God's promises never fail. That even when humanity tries its hardest to go away from the promises of God, that God uses those things for the good, for the salvation of many, and God's promises will always, always come through. So you can know beyond a shadow of a doubt today, because of the book of Genesis and because of these stories, that God loves you and that God has promised to take you home, and that God is coming again, and there is a promised land for you. There is a promised land for me, and it's in the presence of Jesus Christ.